In this lecture, we'll be looking at the political tales of the Weimar Republic, that first experimental period with German democracy that grew out of the First German Empire, the Wilhelmine period that was dominated by militarism, and how that would eventually shape the coming nation. So let's begin with Imperial Germany, shaped in part by the new school and library system that was centralized. Prussia, being one of the first regions to introduce schools in the world in the late 1800s, stressed skills for industrialized labors and ethics. In the early 1900s, the Abitur or diploma was introduced in all the German Empire. As part of this education, the Grimm's fairy tales became indispensable in learning to read with stories that excited children's imagination. If you look at the Queen, Wilhelmina, and the Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, this period is really known as the Wilhelmine period because of its restrictions, rules, and emphasis on civilized culture. So stay laces, and then think about it. The chancellor, the leader of the country, wears his uniform and helmet with this pickelhaube or spike on it. It's a very patriarchal, restrictive, orderly social atmosphere. Conservative, definitely, but liberal also in many ways, as the very first popular vote is introduced. It's a three-tiered system, as well as the modern welfare state, health insurance. Siegfried, that character, is incredibly popular with Hebel and Wagner's adaptations of the source material of the Nibelungenlied, filling theaters and concert halls continuously. The heroic ethos aligned well with this patriarchal identity of the state. And of course, his sacrificial death was celebrated as both a betrayal and the fate faced by the soldier as the epitome of heroic behavior, giving up oneself for the collective. Imperial Germany was strategic in its avoidance of conflict with other neighboring powers. It really avoided amassing of colonies like in many of the other empires, which had become a source of conflict, but instead it enjoyed a role much more as a mediator while investing in scientific research that made it into a technical, chemical, and engineering powerhouse, really the largest economy in Europe in 1900. Eventually, though, however, after Bismarck retired, Wilhelm II demanded colonies, and with a few in the Caribbean, China, and Africa, they joined, and eventually were the third largest colonial empire. If we fast forward then to the Weimar era, we can see a marked difference in attire. Women shattering boundaries, dressing as men, blending genders, a new sense of freedom being enjoyed after the stifling conservative rule of the previous regime. During the war, the lack of laborers saw the introduction of large numbers of women into the workforce. In part, what was a widow to do? Many women who would rather not have ended up begrudgingly being employed just to survive, while other young women saw this as an opportunity to experience the freedom the income unattached to males could secure them. The unfortunate circumstances of the run on banks in the United States and thereafter the pulling of those loans from Germany from those banks to support their economy resulted in an intensely magnified hyperinflation in 1923. And this left many broke and looking for any way to earn a living. The city of Berlin turned into a den for the black market and a mecca for thrills and sex tourism. Meanwhile, the struggling rural areas read eagerly of the exploits and dangers of the city, while also finding them repugnant. Artistic movements were wild and extremely experimental and resulted in a decade of unparalleled artistic achievement in music, film, literature, art, and other mediums. Also, serial killers preyed upon the vulnerable, and their horrific exploits were making headlines in the news, giving rise to the crime novel. Extreme political movements made headway on the right and left as people sought for revolutionary change from the current chaos. And the fledgling democracy survived, but because of the 2% vote representation in the Senate, there's often stalemates in leadership, and in comparison to a monarchy, it felt as if nothing was ever decided, nor progress was being made. Then on October 29th, as the stock market crashed on Wall Street, those memories of hunger and humiliation arose new fears and anxieties, and many turned again to the peddlers of extreme political solutions.